for joining Beyond the Book with Julie Lynn. Today we meet Martha Tolles, author of Love and Sabatoge.
We are so fortunate to be here this morning with Martha Tolles. She was born in Oklahoma City, raised in Rye, New York, graduated from Smith College, went on to become assistant managing editor of a newspaper, and then she married her sweetheart, Leroy Tolles, who was the founding partner of law firm Munger, Tolles & Olson. Together, they raised 6 children, 5 boys and 1 girl, right here in San Marino. How did you decide to write this novel at 97?
Well, I have to admit that I've been working on it for the last 10 years.
But 87, that's
a pretty good age, yes. And why I decided to write it? Well, I'd always wanted to write about that period when I was a newspaper reporter, and that was the time when there was such a changing role for women during World War II, because we were able to get these wonderful jobs as reporters, which had never been available to women in the past. And so I thought that was a particularly interesting period. And then also to show a little bit about what life was like on the home front during the war. Of course, I realize there are other books that cover World War II. There are many of them. Unfortunately, the war fascinates forever. But so I wanted to do all that. And then my experiences as a newspaper reporter were so very interesting. I just thought it was great if I could utilize some of it. And I did use one part of it in one of my middle grade novels called Katie's Babysitting Job. May I just digress for a minute? 3 of those 8 middle grade novels are just being reissued now as ebooks. I don't know if 8 to 12-year-old girls read ebooks, but I hope some of them do, because those 3 are Katie and Those Boys, which, by the way, was originally called Too Many Boys. And then Katie for President, which, when I wrote it, for the first time ever, a girl was president of the San Marino High School student body. And then the third was Katie's Babysitting Job, which my editor in New York was very excited about. She took me into a little small private room to discuss the plot. And with that plot, I was going back to my newspaper days when, is this all right to keep talking like this? All right. Well, it was such an interesting experience because we didn't have much crime when I was a reporter. I'm sorry to say, most of the young men were drafted. And so there wasn't anybody around much. But however, finally a woman called up and said her valuable jewelry was missing. And we all got pretty excited. Here's a crime. But then, a few days later, some little girls from the neighborhood were found playing with this jewelry. So anyway, that's part of the plot of Katie's Babysitting Job. And my editor at Scholastic seemed to really like the whole idea, by the way, of her being a babysitter, and she wanted the word babysitter in the title. Later on, much later on, I was told and read that perhaps that book, it did so well that it inspired them to start that Babysitters series at Scholastic, which some of you may remember.
Wrote your first book, and you were talking about it at your dinner table, and your daughter, of course, that one daughter, said, so you're just a mom who wrote a book. You're not a book author. And what did you say to that?
I don't really remember.
Well, what did you do? What did that inspire you to do?
I just thought that was rather touching. She wanted me to be her mom.
But you went on to write 7 more to show her.
Oh, exactly. But I used to tell that little anecdote. I've spoken in a lot of schools, and I used to tell that story about my daughter saying that to me, and the children never laughed. But the teachers always laughed.
You're raising 6 kids, and then you are on your back. You have back surgery, and you got tired of reading books. You only had one television in your home, and it was downstairs with the kids, and you decided you'd start writing books?
That's it. I just was so bored. And I had done, as she told you, journalism when I was young. And I also worked very briefly on a magazine called Publishers Weekly in New York City. But I had never really written fiction. So that one day I was lying there and was so bored. I'd been surrounded, of course, by children and reading children's books all the time. So I just sort of naturally thought I'd write a story for children. And I found out it was so much fun to make it up. I just loved it. It was like, if any of you found something you loved, food or sewing or dancing or whatever, and you know what that feeling is like. And so I always thought my husband said the right thing because he said parts of it were good. And so that inspired me, you see, to keep trying. So as soon as I was well, I signed up for a night writing class at Pasadena City College. And it was a wonderful class. It was called Writing for Publication. And the teacher was particularly skilled, I think, at making us feel that it was important to try to do this thing and to keep writing, because that's part of the problem. If you don't keep writing, you're not going to get there. And so it was a very inspiring class. And out of that, I began to sell a few magazine stories. So let's see. The first one, well, one of the first ones was to Jack and Jill. And I was telling this, you, I think it was, I was telling, yes, that it came out, and I was quite astonished to have Star News call me and say they wanted to come out and interview me and take my picture for, I mean, you know, a magazine story isn't that big a deal, I thought. But I know that as a reporter, I remembered how we liked to get local news and things. So they came out and took the picture, and with the children around me and holding up copies of the magazine. Well, then the article in the paper, the headline was something like, "Mother of 6 sells story." So I realized.
Because that is quite the accomplishment. I mean, a lot of us can't even juggle 3 kids, let alone 6. That's 2 times the amount I have. So how did you do that, though? I mean, so the babysitters probably started to fall away as you got better and you weren't on your back anymore. How did you carve out that time to keep writing?
It was really very difficult to get time. And my goal was to try to take the first hour of the day after people were fed, at least, and off, if they went to school, off to school. And if I could, I took the first hour. But I remember writing in rather odd places. For instance, I had to take one son to an allergist, and I would have to wait in the waiting room for a while. And so I would do some writing while I was there. And people get curious, and I'd say, they mostly think I was a teacher. And they'd wonder, you know, what is that woman doing? Or I used to take a son surfing, and while he was on the beach, I'd sit in the car and kind of write and watch him.
And so while you were in the doctor's office waiting, and your son was probably sitting next to you waiting, would he just sit there and wait quietly while you wrote away on your own?
Yeah,
He didn't demand your attention or wanting to tell you a story?
Sometimes. It depends. Some twin girls who lived down the street, and they agreed to read the whole book after I finished it. And so their comment was they had really liked it, but that it took quite a while to get into it. So I threw away the first couple of chapters and really got into it, you see. So it was very helpful to have a lot of children around. That's probably why I'm not doing it now.
Did your own children ever make you feel resentful or make you feel guilty that you were spending all this time writing these books and having this career while you could have been more focused on them? Or did that ever enter?
I don't, not very much, because They were always pretty busy, although I do remember a day when I skipped the Little League game and stayed over in the library and wrote my book. And I didn't do that very often. I didn't feel very good about that. I went to the games.
Well, Little
So-
League games go on and on. They're
Right.
several hours long.
I know. And when
And
you
if
have
3
lots of
kids
boys,
do that,
yeah.
that can be a lot of hours. Your husband was always very supportive of you following this career and writing and doing all of this. Talk a little
He
about
was. It was really great. If especially like with that first story, if he had said something like, this isn't really very good, or if he just said, you have an awful lot on your hands, you don't want to try to do this. I'm afraid I would have just said, okay, you're right, and not tried to pursue it. But he was very supportive, and when he could, he went with me to my writing class, and he would sit in the back of the room and read the newspaper while we had the class.
Oh, sweet.
And then when I began to sell, he was really quite proud of me, and he'd say, "Just call me Mr. Martha Tolles."
I love that. That is so special.
Or he'd tell people, "Yes, Martha's writing. We need the money." And so he was very good.
That's really special. I also, like you, have a very, very supportive husband, and I'm grateful for that.
Yes.
But I know we have mostly women here in this audience, but for those who might hear this or watch it elsewhere, what would your advice be to husbands who might not be as supportive? How did having a supportive husband really help you? I know you just mentioned that you probably just would not have if he wasn't supportive, but beyond that, for husbands who maybe don't support their wives' dreams and hopes, can you give some advice to them?
Well, it's difficult. I knew a couple who they were very happy together, but he liked to do things with his wife in the evenings, not just do their things separately. My husband was always reading something, or we would come home from work and then he would have a lot of things to read or whatever. So it isn't as though he wanted me to play cards with him or something. But some husbands have more free time, and so that they want to do things with their wives, which is very understandable. But most wives have plenty of time away from their husbands, it seems to me, when they could pursue whatever it is they want to pursue. And if the husband really didn't like whatever she's doing, well, I don't know how to handle that. Go to somebody and talk it over.
Raising 6 children, what was the best season of being a mother, raising them? When you look back, what did you enjoy the most?
Well, it was a lot of fun when they were all in bed. And we used to, Roy and I would go around, we'd look in every bedroom and look at every little body in the bed.
That's great.
But I don't know. I loved raising all those children. I just thought it was lots of fun. Now, I have to confess, I had this back problem which was ongoing. And so for that reason, I always had some help. So I didn't have to do all the housework that normally I would have had to do. Roy claims, he said to me, you can have a day's help for each child you have. And so therefore I had 6.
Wow.
But,
That's wonderful.
but anyway, I did have this usually nice person named Carrie who was, washing the clothes and keeping the house clean and so on. But I still did the children.
Right.
And we didn't have sort of like nannies in those days. And I don't really remember having any babysitters except for our oldest son, who would manage the group if we left home. We didn't leave home very much in the early days. But it was just a whole lot of fun, but a whole lot of work too. I mean, you just get up early in the morning and go till 10 o'clock at night.
Right.
Just
Yes.
just a long, long day.
Yes, it's very exhausting, which is why
Right.
it is even more incredible that you had 6 kids and managed to write 8 novels during that time, right?
Yes.
They all came while the kids were still at home and in school and growing up, right?
Right. It was an extremely busy time. Time was the big, valuable factor.
So would you say while ladies were lunching, you were writing?
Yes, that's true. Eventually, much later, I always did a little PTA work, but much later, I did get into some volunteer work. But then, when I made my first book sale, I gave up some of the volunteer work because it still was a question of where was the time going to be spent. Part of my motivation, you might say, in doing all this, in writing for children, and later I went around and spoke in about 100 schools, was to inspire children to read. I knew how important that was because my mother had been a reading teacher, and I'd heard for years about the importance of reading and how some children had difficulty this way with it and another way with it. It wasn't just some magical thing that happened to everybody easily.
Right.
And she ran a reading clinic, and in the early days before they had reading clinics, it was very, very popular. So that was one. I tried to write the kind of thing that would make a child want to read it.
Right.
And when my first book sold, and I went to New York to visit the editor, and I told her I'd had this fan letter that I thought was sort of amusing, but she took it quite seriously. In the fan letter, the girl said, "Oh, I just loved your book. Oh, it was such a book, such a good book. It was just wonderful. It's the best book I ever read." And then I turned the letter over on the back, and it said, "And it's the only book I've ever read." But anyway,
Great story.
I guess that showed that it would make children read who hadn't normally read. And
That's
so
wonderful.
I loved to feel that I was helping with doing that. That was part of the thrill of having the big sales.
Did all of your own kids read all of your books?
Well, they were girls' books, and I had sons, so no.
Did you ever think about writing a book for boys?
Yes, my youngest son said to me one day, "Why don't you write a really exciting book, Mom? Something instead of about Katie and Joanne and so on." So I tried to. I wrote one called River Chase. I still think it's a good book. And so this boy's out camping. We used to camp a lot on the Colorado River. And he gets lost in a sandstorm, and he has his dog with him, and the coyotes are howling. And so I never was able to sell that book. So I don't know. I just, one time I was speaking at a school, and a little boy said out loud, he said, "Why doesn't she write a book for us instead of the girls?" And some other boy said, "She doesn't understand us."
But you have 5 sons. You have to understand
I
that.
don't know. But part of that river chase, that's what authors do. They sort of cannibalize their work. They take parts of it out and use it somewhere else. And so I took part of that book and used it as a serialized story I wrote for the LA Times Kids page, if any of you remember that. It was in the 90s. You're too young. And so anyway, and then a few of those stories were later taken on by an education publisher and put into paperbacks. And so that part of that River Chase book became a book called What Happened to the Dog, and it's a paperback. So anyway.
That's amazing. Do you still write for any online publication or newspaper or magazine?
Well, before I wrote this adult novel, I was thinking about that the other day because truly, if you think about it, or if you look into it, not many authors change their category, so to speak. They write mysteries, or if they write, whatever. And if they write for children, they generally stay writing for children. A few authors have gone into the adult world. If any of you remember Judy Blume, she wrote some adult novels after being very successful with her younger things. But after I did the stories for the LA Times, I started writing a few essays, which were for adults. So maybe that was kind of like my transition period from moving from the children's writing to the adult novel. And the first one I wrote, it's in an online magazine called Dame, D-A-M-E, which I believe you can read today if you go on to Dame and then put in my name. And it's called This Is What It's Like to Be 90. And then I sold a few others. I don't know if there's a magazine called The Good Old Days, which is devoted to stories and articles about things that happened in the last century, in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And my essays have so far been about my past, so naturally they were back at that time. So then I sold them over a period of a couple of years, 3 essays. One was called What's Under the Couch, and that was about my early housekeeping days. And then one was about when we got married, and that was during World War II at the naval base in Texas, Corpus Christi. And each pilot was allotted 15 minutes to be married in the base chapel. And I was late. And that essay was called, they changed the title. I wanted it to be, Would I miss my own wedding? But they changed it to Get Me to the Church on Time. Yeah. And then I had another essay about how I had met Roy in the first place. Smith had a tradition called Mountain Day, when if we were smart, we'd try to go visit the boys' colleges. So we did. And that essay was called A Speck in My Eye. And then I had one, I found a magazine called Skirt. It used to be anyway, both online and a print magazine. And that one was called, it was about my lying in bed with my back problems. And it was called Lying Down on the Job. So it was fun to write these, and I might write some more. I'd sort of like to write one about what it's like to be in a retirement home.
Exactly. You don't live in a retirement home, so how will you write about that?
Well, I have an apartment there, but I only visit there so far. So,
And what do you like when you visit there?
what do I like?
Yeah, what do you like about visiting there?
Oh, well, it's near my youngest son and his family. That's the main reason. But they're nice people there, and I'm getting acquainted with them. But a friend of mine told me that because I'm so old, people wouldn't want to bother to make friends with me. So I've been trying to pretend I was younger. These articles keep coming out, putting my age up in the headline.
Well, I think it's absolutely amazing that you are so vivacious and you seem not older than maybe 50. How do you do it? You look amazing. You speak so well. You're so witty. What do you think it is? What's your secret?
I don't know, maybe eating bananas?
Do you eat a lot of bananas?
Well, they prevent leg cramps. Yes.
Well, then we will all start eating bananas so we live as long as you do. One more thing. I saw a video of your 95th birthday where many friends and relatives came to pay tribute to you and share stories. It was absolutely amazing, but you started planning that birthday party 2 years ahead of your 95th birthday.
Oh, yeah.
So now you are 97. Which birthday are you planning now?
Yes, the 100th.
The 100th.
Yeah, my friend who helped me arrange that 95th said, "You're planning your party 2 years from now?" And she said, "You're like people who buy green bananas and expect to be around to eat them when they get ripe." But one little thing I wanted to say completely off this subject, but on the subject of my new book, one of her big problems, plot problems, is that she has this too friendly boss. And I wanted to say that I more or less emphasized that, made that much more of a problem in the last few years because of all the things I'd been hearing. And if you're curious, it was not my own experience. I didn't have any such experiences. I had a few women bosses, and I didn't work much. So.
And speaking of that, you were working at a time when most women didn't work, and it was kind of new.
Yes.
Talk a little bit more about your own experience and how you were raised to know that you wanted to go to the workplace and that you were equal.
Oh. Well, it's so interesting. That's a very interesting question. And it's really quite a question. Anyway, because I actually didn't have perhaps the usual traditional childhood, but so many girls at that time were raised to think that they wouldn't be doing things like that and weren't expecting to do things like that. But my own family was not quite traditional. I had an aunt who was a very successful journalist in New York City. And so there was always that example, I think, most of all, without anybody saying anything. Here was a woman who had a column with her name on it in the New York papers. So,
Amazing.
Totally unspoken, but it didn't, and then I had another aunt who was a very successful, first as an interior decorator, and then she became, I think the word is colorist, but she was flown around to factories and mixed the colors that they were to use on their blankets and towels. This is very unusual for a woman, to be doing this. And then my own mother, after she gave up teaching, as I told you, opened one of the first reading clinics. So these were all women who were doing things. Mm-hmm. And so no one ever said, "Oh, women can do things if they like." It was just clear that they could.
Right.
And so I didn't perhaps have the same feeling that, most of my contemporaries were planning to be teachers. They really, mm-hmm. That was it. But
you had other aspirations.
But I had that aspiration. I thought I liked journalism. I thought that's what I wanted to do. But then after the war ended and Roy came home and he started law school and we started our family. So then I too thought, now it's time to be back home and take care of things there. I did write one article while I was there at Harvard, but that's because my aunt asked me to. But I too put aside writing, mm-hmm. and thought, now it's time to be mom. But then when the back problems came along and I discovered fiction, life changed.
Right.
And I did have the right kind of husband. Now, you asked me why I am doing so well or whatever. I had a wonderful mother and a family, really. And I had a wonderful husband. So those things can make you pretty happy.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And everyone in those tributes said that you are extremely joyful. You find the joy in everything.
Well, life has its ups and downs, and we all know their downs. Mm-hmm. And we go through them the best we can. But then when things are good, then you enjoy them.
That's right. Martha Tolles, so lovely to have you here this morning. Thank you for being with us.
You're wonderful. Wonderful audience.